Son-in-law shook my hand at the rehearsal dinner and told me I was the father he never had. 8 months later, I watched a federal agent put handcuffs on him in my own driveway. I keep thinking about that handshake. Firm. Confident. He looked me straight in the eye the way my own father taught me a man should. I remember thinking, this is a good one. Helen picked a good one. I was wrong about almost everything that year. My name is not important. What matters is that I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a structural engineer in Portland, Oregon, and I thought I understood how things were built, including families. I thought I could read the load-bearing walls. I thought I knew which structures would hold. Helen is my daughter. She's 34, sharp as anyone I've ever met, and she has her mother's laugh, the kind that fills a whole room without trying. When she brought home the man she wanted to marry, I did what fathers do. I paid attention. I watched how he treated the waitstaff at restaurants. I noticed whether he held the door. Small things. The things that tell you who someone actually is. His name was Preston Aldgate. He worked in financial planning. Private wealth management, he called it, and he had a way of explaining things that made you feel like you were already behind on understanding them. Smart. Polished. He wore watches that cost more than my first car, but he always had a reason why that was actually a sound investment. My wife, Gloria, liked him immediately. That should have been my first clue, because Gloria has always had better instincts than me about people. But this time, I think she saw what she wanted to see, what we both wanted to see. Someone who would take care of our daughter. We paid for the wedding, $72,000 at a vineyard outside Newburgh. It was beautiful. Helen cried. I cried. Preston gave a toast that made every woman in the room reach for a tissue. I thought about that toast a lot later, when I understood what it actually cost me. The first sign that something was wrong came about 14 months after the wedding. Helen called me on a Tuesday morning, which was unusual. She typically texted the way her generation does. But she called, and when I answered, she said, "Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." I said, "Of course. Did you and Mom change anything about your estate plan recently? Like, anything at all?" I told her no. Gloria and I had done our estate planning 7 years earlier with an attorney downtown. Simple stuff. The house, my retirement accounts, a small life insurance policy, everything split evenly between Helen and her brother, Miles. We hadn't touched it since. There was a pause on the line. "Okay," Helen said. "Okay, I'm sure it's nothing." But she didn't sound sure. She sounded the way she used to sound when she was 9 years old and trying to hide that something had gone wrong at school. I asked her what was going on. She said she'd found something on Preston's computer. She'd been trying to print a boarding pass and his laptop was the closest one. She said she hadn't meant to look, but a document had been open on the screen and the document had my name on it. She couldn't remember exactly what it said. She'd panicked and closed it. Preston had come home 20 minutes later and she hadn't said anything to him. "What kind of document?" I asked. "It looked like, I don't know, legal?" There was a signature line. "Dad, there was something that looked like your signature on it." I told her I was sure there was an explanation. I told her not to worry about it. I hung up the phone and sat in my kitchen for a long time, looking at the backyard where I'd built a deck 20 years ago, where Helen used to do cartwheels in the grass, until she was too old to think cartwheels were worth doing anymore. Then I called my attorney. What my attorney found, after 3 phone calls and a week of digging, was not subtle. Someone had submitted a change of beneficiary form to the company managing my retirement accounts, an IRA worth approximately $340,000, and a 401k from my previous employer worth just under $180,000. The forms redirected a substantial portion of both accounts, 60% of each, to a trust I had never heard of. The trust was called Aldgate Family Holdings. I know how I should have felt in that moment. Furious. Betrayed. But honestly, the first thing I felt was just a cold, flat disbelief. The kind you feel when you're a structural engineer, and someone shows you a building you designed, except the blueprints have been altered and you didn't sign the revision. I asked my attorney how this was possible. She told me that financial institutions process a high volume of these forms and that verification procedures, while improving, are not always rigorous. She said the signature on the forms was a very good forgery. She said she wanted me to involve law enforcement before doing anything else. I asked her if she thought my son-in-law did this. She said she thought I should let law enforcement answer that question. I want to be careful here about how I describe what came next, because this is the part that's hardest to explain to people who were inside it. I did not tell Helen. I know that sounds wrong. She's my daughter. She was married to the man we are building a case against. But my attorney advised me strongly that if Preston suspected anything, he might move assets, destroy evidence, or her word, not mine, escalate. I didn't fully understand what escalate meant in that context until much later. I also didn't tell Gloria. That was the hardest part. Gloria and I have been married 38 years. We have had exactly 2 secrets from each other in that time, and both of them were surprise parties. I have never kept anything from her that mattered. But I kept this. I went to work every morning. I came home. I grilled salmon on Thursdays the way I always do. We watched our shows. Gloria would talk about her book club, her garden, the neighbor's new dog. I would nod and say the right things, and inside I felt like a man standing on ice that was cracking beneath him, stepping very carefully and trying not to look down. The FBI got involved because the forgery crossed state lines. Some of the account documentation had been processed through a financial clearinghouse in Colorado. A woman named Special Agent Reyes was assigned to the case. She was younger than I expected, businesslike, and she explained everything in a way that was thorough without being condescending. She told me the forms were part of a pattern. She told me Preston had done this before. I had to sit with that for a moment. She explained that Preston Aldgate had a previous marriage, one he had not disclosed to Helen, one that had ended in divorce after approximately 2 years. His ex-wife, a woman in Sacramento, had filed a complaint with state financial regulators alleging unauthorized account changes. The case had not resulted in charges at the time. Insufficient evidence, a technicality, but it had created a paper trail, a thread. And once Agent Reyes' team started pulling that thread, things came apart quickly. He'd done it with her retirement account. He tried to do it with her late mother's small trust. He'd gotten away with enough of it to fund the lifestyle that had impressed me at Helen's rehearsal dinner. I asked Agent Reyes how long the investigation would take. She said she wanted another 6 to 8 weeks to build a complete case so the charges would be airtight. She asked me if I could maintain my normal behavior around Preston in the meantime. I told her yes. She looked at me for a moment like she was deciding whether to believe me. I guess I must have seemed credible because she said, "Mr. and used my name. You're doing the right thing. I know this is very hard." I nodded. I drove home and grilled salmon. The thing about keeping a secret like that is what it does to the way you look at someone. Family dinners became an exercise in something I don't have a precise word for. We had Preston and Helen over twice a month. That was our normal rhythm. And I would sit across the table from this man and watch him eat my food and laugh at things I said and put his hand on my daughter's arm. And I would think about the document with my forged signature on it. And I would think about the woman in Sacramento. I watched him the way I used to watch structures I wasn't sure about. Looking for the place where the thing didn't add up. Looking for the crack. He was very good. That was the frustrating thing. He was charming and engaged, and he asked about my work, about my brother's health, about the deck project I'd been meaning to start. He remembered details. He was the kind of person who makes you doubt your own memory, who makes you wonder if maybe you misread the document, misheard the attorney. One evening in March, he poured me a glass of wine and said, "You know, I've been thinking we should all go somewhere together this summer, some kind of family trip, the 4 of us and Miles's crew. What do you think?" I said it sounded nice. I looked at my daughter laughing at something on her phone beside him, and I thought about the trust called Aldgate Family Holdings, and I drank the wine he poured me, and I said it sounded really nice. The hardest conversation of my life happened on a Wednesday in April. Agent Reyes called me that morning and said they were ready to move. The case was built. They had the forged documents. They had the financial records of the trust. They had communications, emails and texts. Some recovered from a backed-up device in which Preston discussed the plan with someone else, a friend or associate. They were still working that piece out. She said they would execute the arrest warrant the following Monday. She asked me if I wanted to tell my daughter before it happened. I said yes. I needed to be the one to tell Helen. I drove to their house, Helen and Preston's house, a craftsman bungalow in southeast Portland that I had helped them with the down payment on, another fact that sat in my chest like a stone, and I asked Helen to come outside and take a walk with me. Preston was at work. We walked to the end of their street and around the block, and I told her everything. I have watched my daughter cry at movies, at weddings, at the end of a hard day. I have held her while she cried when her first dog died, and when she didn't get into the graduate program she wanted, and when she called me from a bathroom floor at 22 after a breakup I knew wasn't worth crying over, but didn't say so. I have never seen her cry the way she cried that afternoon on the sidewalk in front of a neighbor's house with her yellow tulips just coming up through the mulch. She said, "Dad, I found that document." I said, "I know." She said, "I found it and I closed it because I was afraid of what it meant, and I should have. I told her she didn't do anything wrong. She said, "I should have trusted my gut. I should have called you immediately." I held my daughter on that sidewalk and I thought about the rehearsal dinner and the toast and the handshake and the man who had looked me straight in the eye. I thought about how we build the structures we want to believe in, sometimes, instead of the ones that are actually there. Monday came. Gloria knew by then. I told her the night before Helen, actually, because I couldn't go to sleep that night without telling her. She held my hand in the dark and didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, "You protected us?" I told her I didn't feel like I had. She said, "You did what you were supposed to do, and you did it without falling apart. That's protecting us." Preston arrived home at 6:15 p.m. Agent Reyes and 2 other agents were waiting. I wasn't there. Helen asked me not to be there, and I understood. She needed that moment to be hers. She told me about it later, how he pulled into the driveway and seen the cars and gone, very still. How he hadn't run. How he looked at her standing on the porch and said her name once, just her name, like a question, and she had looked back at him and not said anything at all. The charges were federal, wire fraud, forgery, identity theft in connection with financial documents. The case took 14 months to resolve. Preston's attorney tried to negotiate, tried to argue that the previous Sacramento incident should be inadmissible, tried a few things that didn't work. Preston pleaded guilty the week before trial was set to begin. He was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. The retirement accounts were fully restored through the legal process. It took time and it required documentation. I am glad my attorney had helped me start gathering early. The Aldgate Family Holdings Trust was dissolved. What assets had moved through it were traced and largely recovered. Helen filed for divorce the week after the arrest. It was finalized 9 months later. She moved back into our neighborhood for a while. Not with us, but close. She bought a small place 6 blocks away, and I helped her paint the living room a color called Oyster Bay that I would have called gray, but apparently is distinctly different from gray if you know what you're looking at. We have dinner together on Thursdays now. Sometimes it's just the 2 of us. Sometimes Gloria joins us. Sometimes Miles brings the kids and it's loud, and someone inevitably knocks over a drink. Ellen started seeing someone new about a year ago. I'll be honest, I was not ready for that. I noticed myself watching, measuring, doing the structural assessments again. She called me on it gently in the way she does. She said, "Dad, I'm paying attention too now. You don't have to do it alone." I thought about that for a few days. She was right. I don't. People ask me sometimes. Not many people know the full story, but the ones who do ask, they say, "How did you do it? How did you sit across the table from that man for weeks and act normal?" I don't have a great answer. I think part of it was that I'm an engineer. My job, my whole career was finding the problem before the structure failed. Quietly, methodically, without drama, because drama doesn't help a building stand up or figure out why it won't. And part of it was anger, honestly, a cold, focused kind of anger that I kept in a very small, very tight container and did not open until it was useful. But mostly, I think it was Helen, the image of her on that sidewalk, the way she said I should have trusted my gut. I wanted to be able to tell her when this was over that somebody had trusted theirs. I had 340,000 reasons to stay calm, and one reason that was worth more than all of them. There's one more thing. About 2 months after the sentencing, I got a card in the mail. No return address, but the postmark was Sacramento. Inside was a plain note card with 3 sentences on it. I heard what happened. I'm glad it worked out. I should have fought harder back then. I don't know her name. I never reached out. I hope she's okay. I put the card in the drawer of my nightstand, where I keep the things that matter, but don't have a category. It's still there. I'm still here too. We all are. That's the part that matters. I've thought a lot about what Preston actually did wrong. Not legally, I mean as a person. And the honest answer is that he made one calculation over and over again, and it was always the same one. He assumed that the people around him were not paying attention. That's the thing about people who deceive. They don't think of themselves as bold or clever, not really. They think of themselves as the only person in the room who is truly awake. Everyone else is furniture. Everyone else is a resource to be used or a variable to be managed. They mistake patience in other people for passivity. They mistake kindness for blindness. Preston shook my hand and looked me in the eye and called me the father he never had, and he believed, I think, that he had me completely figured out. Retired engineer, trusting, sentimental about his daughter, the kind of man who grills salmon on Thursdays and doesn't look too hard at documents he didn't ask to see. He wasn't wrong about some of it. I am sentimental about Helen. I do grill salmon on Thursdays, but he missed the part that actually mattered. That I spent 31 years finding the flaw before the structure collapsed. That I am constitutionally incapable of letting a thing go once I know something is off. He saw the surface and stopped looking. And that is always, eventually, how these things fall apart. Not because the world is just, not because wrongdoing automatically triggers consequences. It doesn't. And anyone who tells you otherwise hasn't been paying attention. It falls apart because deception requires the deceiver to be smarter than everyone, all the time, indefinitely. And no one is. The math doesn't work forever. At some point, someone pays attention. Someone makes a phone call. Someone finds a document open on a laptop and doesn't quite close it fast enough before the image burns into their memory. Helen blamed herself for months. She kept saying she should have acted sooner, should have trusted what she saw. I've told her, and I mean this, that she did exactly what she needed to do. She called me. She trusted that I would take it seriously. That's not nothing. That's actually everything. What I want her to understand, what I want anyone listening to understand, is that the three things that actually got us through this were not luck, and they were not connections, and they were not righteous anger, though I had plenty of that. It was patience, which is a form of discipline. It was honesty with the right people at the right time, which is a form of courage. And it was the willingness to do the hard thing quietly, without recognition, without knowing for certain how it would end. That's not a philosophy I learned from a book. It's what my father showed me by example, and what 30 years of engineering reinforced. You don't solve a structural problem by getting emotional at the building. You document, you verify, you call the right people, you wait. Preston is serving 7 years. Helen painted her living room. Oyster Bay and is building something new. Gloria still has better instincts about people than I do, and I've stopped arguing with her about it, and I still grill salmon on Thursdays. Some structures you keep,